Good morning, good afternoon. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another exciting episode of Logic Live. Good morning, Carrie Welton, from what I hope is sunny California. So sunny. Hello, Anil. Hello, Yuri. Hello, Eduardo. If everybody in the chat could just make sure that you set the chat to all panelists and attendees so that everybody can see the messages. Hello, Richard. Hello, Jeff. All right. Hello, Ben. Ben Vaccaro. How you been, man? All right, let's get underway. I'll do the magical fade out, the audio fade out here. Hello, MB. Congratulations on your son's graduation today. And hello, Greg Paul. Greetings. Greetings from the planet Earth. All right. Well, welcome to another Logic Live, friends. My name is Andy. Happy to be back here again on a Sunday with you all. Today, we're going to have a fantastic presentation with our friends from Boris Effects, showing off the new silhouette paint. And Logic Live is brought to you by Synesys Oceania. Synesys is my reseller. They've been my reseller for 15 years. We couldn't do what we do without them. These guys sponsor all the Flame user groups here in North America and have always been wonderful supporters of the Flame community. So we want to thank them for their continued support. Synesys Oceania, solutions, integration, and support for digital content creators. You can reach them and find out all about them at synesys.io. Synesys Oceania, supporting Flame artists since 1997. Let me stop the share here. And just a reminder before we get underway, if you have questions, please log them in the Q&A panel so that everybody can see the questions, and it'll be the easiest way for us to get them answered. I want to welcome my two guests for today, Shain and Marco Paolini from Boris Effects. If you guys want to turn your cameras on. There we go.
Andy.
Hello, gentlemen.
Hi.
Welcome to Logic Live. So,
thanks for having us.
Ross, of course. Ross and Marco both work for Boris Effects. And why don't you guys tell us a little bit about yourselves and a little bit about your backgrounds. Marco, why don't we start with you?
My name is Marco Paolini. I'm the product designer of Silhouette. And as far as my background goes, I started off as a cameraman, then a video editor, then doing graphics. Made my way to Avid Technology, where I worked on Matador and Illusion back in the 90s, and started digital film tools and Silhouette Effects in the 2000s. And we were recently acquired by Boris Effects in September, continuing to develop Silhouette. And so, you know, my background is kind of a combination of user and software development.
Excellent. And Ross?
Yeah, so I'm Ross Shain with Boris Effects. I'm Chief Product Officer. I started my career, well, I played a lot of bands in New York City, actually, back in the early 90s. But I got a job, I went to film school and got a job working for Avid in my early 20s. For me, that was like my, my grad school. You know, and they threw a Media Composer, I think V4 on my desk and said, here, you know, put it together. It was on a Quadra, 950, Mac Quadra 950. But at Avid, I got really excited about visual effects and was really a big proponent of COSA After Effects. And then Avid bought Parallax and Elastic Reality. And I was lucky enough to meet Marco and Paul back in the day, actually, in the 90s. And I became a specialist on Matador, Elastic Reality, and then Avid bought Softimage, kind of did a lot of stuff with that as well. I'm similar to Marco in the sense I think that I've also bounced around in production myself in New York City, but I think I have similar experience or interests in Marco is like product design and sort of being an evangelist for visual effects tools and trying to communicate, you know, what the users want. Really, kind of sort of like the go-between between the developers and the users.
That's great. I know just in my experience with you guys and with the development team at Autodesk, I know that you as developers you thrive on the feedback from the users in terms of what features to add, what things to develop, how to tweak the UI, and so I just wanted to thank both of you for always being so available and so accessible to the user community in terms of getting these tools, developed. And thank you
Yeah,
for joining us
we
today.
love it. I mean, I think, I didn't mention, that I was on the Moccha team for, about 8 years before Boris Fex acquired us. And I think that certainly Moccha team, Boris Fex, and Silhouette team now, we're super like engaged with the users, and we want, when people tell us like they're having an issue, we want to fix it. So, thank you.
You'll be proud of me. I used Moccha in production for the first time,
Oh, nice.
like in the last, I guess it was last week and a half. It was always that thing that like I was going to do, and I finally did it, and I'm becoming a convert. So thank you very much.
Cool. Great.
All right. Well, let's talk about Silhouette. You guys want to maybe take us a little bit through the philosophy or the history of the product and what's new in this new version, and then we'll dive
Yeah,
right
maybe
in.
I'll share my screen while Mark and I talk over a couple just slides, then we can sort of talk about the sort of evolution from Silhouette to Silhouette Paint. So let me know if you can see my screen.
Yeah, you can see it.
Yes, sir.
All right, so yeah, I'll kick it off, but Marco, please jump in. Boris Fex, we're very committed to the Flame community. I think everyone knows us very well from Sapphire, which Boris acquired Gen Arts about 3 years ago, I think, 3.5, 4 years ago. Moccha was used by the Flame community for many years as a standalone sort of companion application. And then Silhouette as a standalone application. Probably a lot of people, especially if you've been sending roto overseas to any of the roto outsourcing, you've probably worked with many companies that use Silhouette. So I just want to make the point that these are the three products that we make right now that support Autodesk Flame via OFX. Is the Sapphire, Moccha Pro, and Silhouette Paint. So we're going to talk about Silhouette Paint. And I thought I'd just kind of share this slide, and maybe Marco, if you want to kind of talk a little bit about Silhouette and where it came from, and how the evolution from roto to compositing, that would be great.
Sure. I was working at Digital Filmworks at the time in the early 2000s, where we did visual effects, and at that time we were using Matador and Illusion and Shake. But the dedicated roto tools there wasn't really a program that was being really actively developed at that time. So we were working on Thank You for Not Smoking, and I had a shot where the actor was walking in front of a bunch of Venetian blinds, and we needed to replace the background behind those Venetian blinds, and there was no way to key it. So we said, we really should just make our own roto program to handle this. And so that's how, the seed of it started. And we started with roto. And version, I think 1.5 of Silhouette, we added paint. And initially when we launched it, the first customer was Weta, who met us at SIGGRAPH that year. And they were working on King Kong. And, they looked at it. They gave us a list of feature requests that they wanted. Which we implemented, and it kind of took off from there. We added paint and then morphing, keying. We were trying to put together everything that you would need in a kind of a prep station for feeding visual effects houses. And it then moved to the point where customers were saying, we'd like to be able to finish the shot in Silhouette. So if you can give us some compositing and some basic tools. That's where it led to the node-based system that it is now. Because of our relationship with Digital Film Tools, which is another company that we owned, we had a lot of different filters and nodes, which we could then bring into that. So it grew from, which was something that was inherently a node-based application, but those nodes were not exposed. We then exposed the paint node, the roto node, the morphing node, the keying node. and then added compositing and allowed then the users to hook those up the way they wanted. You know, that's been over the course of, I don't know, 15, 16 years now. And I think, let's see, Ross, I think it was like 2013 where we licensed Moccha. We were looking
That's right. Yeah.
for, you know, we had our own point tracker, we had our own planar tracker, but the planar tracker was not as good as Moccha. Moccha was the best tracker for planar tracking. And we licensed that tracker. We integrated it into Silhouette. Previously, it was an option. Now with 2020, the integrated version of Moccha Pro or the Moccha tracker is included in Silhouette. And of course, the standalone application also has the option for the Silhouette, for the Moccha Pro OFX plugin. So within Silhouette Paint, which is a plugin for Flame and Nuke and other OFX hosts, you have the integrated Moccha Pro tracker.
Yeah, in fact, it's kind of interesting that we've actually, since Boris acquired us, we've put Moccha, the tracking engine, into all the products, even Sapphire. You know, if you're running Sapphire and Flame, you have a light version of Moccha inside it. You can track lens flares, and it's great for tracking Zap, the lightning filter, stuff like that. So yeah, so Silhouette Paint, you know, that was a kind of cool, great introduction to, you know, what Silhouette is. And it's really become sort of a tool that's been used over the years as a roto prep, you know, station by many feature film, you know, customers. Been used on hundreds of films. When Boris acquired Silhouette, we kind of looked at all the technology, and kind of similar to what we did with Moccha about, at this point it's about 5-6 years ago, turning it into a plugin from a standalone. We talked to a lot of customers, and, you know, thank you, Andy, for talking to us in New York. We talked to a lot of Flame users, Nuke users, After Effects users, and one thing that just resonated was Paint. That while all the host applications have Paint modules, we're sitting on this great, you know, very robust Paint tool that's already, you know, has color management, has 32-bit, is very fast, and has some very advanced tools. So we basically decided to turn the Paint module of Silhouette into a plugin. And so right now we're supporting pretty much Adobe, Flame, Resolve, and Fusion with that. And Marco, you know, we'll kind of, maybe these features we'll kind of just hit on as we open up the interface. We don't want to just look at slides all day.
Sure.
One thing I do want to mention, though, is, you know, again, sort of like people have been asking us, you know, what is the need for a Paint plugin? And, you know, as all you guys are running on Flame on Linux, probably, you know, a great thing is, you know, well, you don't have to jump over your Mac to Photoshop. You have a fully featured Paint tool that you could open up inside your Flame on Linux. It is a cross-host plugin, which we're pretty excited about, meaning, you know, if you start a Paint session in After Effects with Silhouette Paint, you could bring that Paint session over to Flame or to Nuke. So it's basically the industry's first shared workflow tool for Paint, you know, to collaborate on Paint. Another thing you'll see is that the Paint is very, very responsive, and that's because it's raster Paint. So with that all said, I think it might make sense to just open up the interface and start showing some stuff. Does that sound good, Andy?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. Well, I'm going to jump down. I'm running Flame here on a Mac, and I'm just going to talk a little bit about, you know, show you a couple quick examples. This shot, I'm going to open up. I have the Silhouette OFX Paint already loaded, and you hit the open Silhouette interface. You're going to show this custom interface, and here's the original shot. And I just use Silhouette just to kind of do a one frame, just paint out kind of deal here. And so I'm going to take a step back, start from scratch, and then kind of just walk you through the workflow for a flame artist. Okay, so up here I just have a blank shot there. Again, you know, just load Silhouette, open up the interface. And actually, let's just delete all this stuff. And all right, so here's my original shot. If I hit Command, let me see. Okay, just want to kind of show you sort of some of the interface stuff up here. Up here, you obviously have some view controls. We'll kind of cover that. Silhouette does have OCIO built in, so if you were running an ACES workflow, you could load a color managed workflow. That's kind of a nice thing. Over here on your left, these are basically the different paint tools, and we'll go over there. And then when you click a tool, basically, so if I click like the paint tool, you'll see down here where these are all the controls. All right, so Option 8 to close that. And here, let me do that. Make this a little bigger so you guys can see there. So here I have pressure sensitive paint with the Wacom tablet. Every time you make a paint stroke, what you're going to see is down here on the left, you're going to see those strokes. So Silhouette is a raster-based paint system, but then what we can actually do is run a script to auto paint these strokes. And if you've, I don't know, Andy, if you've ever gotten deep into like a flame paint session, you know, especially on Nuke 2, like vector paint can get really, really slow.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So let's just delete this.
You know, it's got its strengths and its weaknesses clearly, but one of them is
exactly.
the more you pile on, the bigger it gets as it tries to keep track of all that stuff.
All right, so so that's, you know, the paint tool, and I want to show you that if I look at the output up here, this is basically output. The foreground is actually what we're painting on, but we also have a Silhouette is naturally sort of inherently has the ability to do detail separation and color separation. So here we have a color separation and we have our detail separation. So for example, if I want to paint a color, let's just zoom in here. I'll pick off the screen. So I just picked a little bit of that red, and here we're just obviously painting. I'll undo that. Down here, I could paint just the color, and that's just a nice way to sort of bring in this color. There's, again, let's just pick this color from right here. And, or if I wanted to paint detail.
And what Silhouette's doing there, we automatically deconstruct the image into color and detail layers and then automatically comp them together. So Ross has the ability there to paint only on the color or only paint in the detail. When he paints only on the color, retains the detail. When he paints only on the detail, retains the color. So it really kind of splits out, for instance, the clone tool into kind of really making it multifunction.
Yeah, so I'll jump into the clone tool.
It's fantastic that you guys have that, that you guys have that like at the core of Silhouette Paint, because doing the frequency separation, especially for beauty work, is something that we all do, or many of us do, but it requires multiple steps. And sometimes those steps are processing intensive or processor intensive. So having this just, you know, kind of be there for you is a great feature.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what you'll sort of see as we go through these tools, is that the tools are really sort of optimized. You know, you can do a lot of this kind of stuff in almost any compositing or paint tool, but the idea that it's sort of like just integrated all together. Here I'm just doing a little bit of clone, you know, holding down shift to clone out this these kind of areas, obviously. What's really cool about the clone tool, and I'll cover this a little bit more, is you know, I could save these offsets here. So I could save this. You can save presets. So that's you know, one of my preset offsets. Then if I want to, you know, do a different offset and save that. You even have the ability to show an interactive view. And the reason for this, you know, for a brick wall, for example, is if I actually wanted to do some cloning, it's kind of neat here, is that you can show an overlay. So if I wanted to like line up like some kind, you know, line up the pattern of the bricks, for example, but a little bit offset. And then here you can show the basically difference mode. You can show a you know, basically left-right view, a top-bottom view, and basically switch between these two. So you can set up this interactive mode, and then when you're cloning, you're going to be cloning from. So there, I have, you know, because I lined it up, you know, I can clone from the cleaner, like white lines, that kind of thing. I'll show you an example as we get through here that's more evolved here, where you can do like a vanishing point offset with the clone as well. So this is kind of like just jumping into the very basics of paint. Again, down here, every single stroke that I've done is going to be recorded, and that can be basically played back and linked to tracking data for much more evolved, like paint out kind of tools. And every parameter of every stroke is recorded as well. So the offsets for every different clone, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's very powerful. Any questions? Or I'm going to just jump into another quick example.
Yeah, we have one question in the QA here. You mentioned the detail mode and frequency separation. Is there any control over the frequency ranges?
There actually is. There's some presets there that Ross is showing. There's coarse, medium, and fine. And just to the left, there's the numeric slider, which those presets are setting. So 0 is coarse, 0.5 is medium, 1 is fine. So you can interactively change that between strokes. So Ross may start off at a coarse detail, do some painting, and then later go to kind of fine detail to get rid of some blemishes. And that's all recorded in that paint history so that it can be reproduced later in some of the further examples. You'll see why that becomes important.
That's great.
Cool. And again, everything, once you start learning the software, there's lots of keystrokes for everything just to speed up your workflow, whether it's toggling through your paint or your basically your detail mode, your color view, that kind of thing. Okay, so I'm going to just close this. What's cool?
Well, I was going to say, Ross, while you're switching that, I think the best way to think of the auto paint that we call auto paint, just think of Silhouette, the system in Silhouette, as just kind of like a constantly recording macro. So everything that you do is remembered: brush size, type of brush, where you painted, and that all becomes, again, important later when you want to reproduce those steps for whatever reason.
Okay, so my next shot I was playing around with last night just to kind of show, I was just thinking back about the type of stuff I used to do. I'm sure, Andy, you and your team do a lot of this stuff, and all these flame guys, a producer come into your room and say, hey, how long is it going to take to remove this? You got to look at it.
I thought you meant BMX biking, but yes,
yeah.
In terms of client requests and things in the room, I completely can follow you. Yes.
Yeah. So here's a shot, with a logo on this helmet, and obviously we want to remove it, but we want to create it very realistically. I kind of chose a shot just to play with, just because it's one of those shots that you might think it's very simple, but the subtlety of the lighting and the curvature there, it's not a totally slam dunk, just jump in and do a couple clone brushes. It's actually a lot more advanced. The way I did this was just doing this here with tons of these brushes, and you can see there's tons of strokes. What I kind of like to show is if you look here, you're going to see all the different strokes that I've done, right? I did a lot of strokes, and it's a combination of cloning, of the blemish tool, of a little dodge and burn. So I'm going to just I'll delete it and show you how I did that. But I just think this is kind of neat to see that there's so many different strokes. And what's cool is, like, at any point, if I saw, if I made a little error, you can actually, select any of these strokes and delete them. So it is this like real beauty of hybrid and a script, a vector. It is raster paint, but at any time you can go back and make changes. I'll also show you here, let me just hide this here. I'll also show you that up here in the roto area, this is basically where you can set up your tracking. And can I move these screens here a little bit? Okay. So I have a layer here that was set up where I've already tracked this, but this was done by tracking, trying to move do you guys see I'm trying to move the zoom window around so I can see my interface. Anyways, so yeah, you can see here I'm in the tracking panel. The way you get to that is you create a shape. You touch that shape and just hit the little tracking button. And then you have a point tracker, like Marco mentioned. You have a planar tracker, which is actually quite robust in its own right for certain kinds of shots. And then you do have the Moccha tracker as well. And let's just delete that. So I tracked this helmet layer right here using the Moccha tracker. And if we actually look at this here, you'll see this is the track data that's already been tracked. And up in the interface, you have a really nice tool, which is the stabilize. So here I have, I've tracked the background, and I've also tracked the helmet. And I'll just play through this, and you'll see we're actually using that planar track and locking down the viewer, which is just a really nice, and I didn't have to set up anything special to set up this view. So that's that view. And then here I also have, this background track, which happened to be this area right here, because I was playing around with removing some of the background guys in the shot as well. But you can just basically just jump around and click on the selected layer that you've already tracked to look at your stabilized view. And this gets very, very important for complex paintouts, as you can imagine, where you want to stabilize exactly what you're painting on so you don't have to chase it around the screen, right? That kind of idea.
And you're stabilizing in Silhouette is really, it's just the viewport that's being stabilized. You're not actually stabilizing the pixels of the image themselves. You're not doing anything. One of the things you find is the more you stabilize and unstabilize something, that can lead to image degradation because you are.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. There's no processing being done because when we do our paint, we're going to be you're actually painting on the non-stabilized view. It's just for the viewer and for the artist. So yeah, it's a very powerful way to start working. We have a lot of in the Adobe world, we have a lot of After Effects users who use the Moccha tracker. Then they stabilize, they do a lot of work and remove the stabilization, but they're doing it through pre-comps and rendering. So absolutely, Andy, you start losing a lot of, quality.
Mm-hmm. I think it's so great too, because it really shows as a user, I can see that you guys develop this from a user's point of view, either through user feedback or from your own experience of being users. Otherwise, some of these time-saving features that you've built in would, I think, just get overlooked. It's really a wonderful thing.
So I'm just going to kind of just show you, I'm not going to do the whole thing, but, just kind of show you the steps that I use. I'm sure Marco could give me lots of tips, but, I'm just going to, quickly, the first thing I did is I started, doing some like cloning here. Actually, let's just delete all this stuff.
And Ross, you're viewing your foreground there.
Yep, thank you. Move this out of the way here.
Marco, you remind me of like when I've been teaching my daughter how to drive.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sitting in the passenger seat, and sometimes I just want to.
And keep in mind, like I said, Marco, did like train me, so many years ago. So I'm probably it's just kind of funny. Yeah. So
Ross has 17 or so different brushes to work from, and of course, clone's the go-to brush, and he's probably going to use a number of different techniques here to do what he's doing.
Exactly. So I started, kind of just doing some clone like this, and maybe just to do it a little bit more rough. But what's really cool that I found is just like, you can see I'm working on this the way I would work in Photoshop. I mean, it's like, it's super interactive, even at like a high resolution, 4K or whatever. So I might start, doing something like this, and you're going to say, as soon as I pull back, you're going to say, oh, that looks like crap, get a real flame artist to do this job. But I'm going to kind of show you how I would, kind of, let's just pull back. Yeah, that looks like crap, right? So, but what we can start doing is then combining the different tools. So up here, the first, I've been doing clone and paint, but, one of the nice tools is this blemish tool. What the blemish tool is, it's a combination of blur and grain. So by default, if I just do this, I've already set this up, but what I'll show you is like with the overlay, it's kind of a neat way to look at it. And let's just look at this like this. So I'm looking at just the red channel here.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I'll just throw the grain up a little bit more so you can sort of see it. Basically what you have on the right side is like the amount of grain, this is like, you're actually previewing. It's like a preview of the brush before you paint. So it's a nice way that you can sort of like, dial in your grain settings before you actually paint. If that makes sense.
Totally. couple of questions here while you're doing that. Can the clone be confined, or can the clone offsets be confined to integers, so there's less need for filtering? And also, what are the filter selections? You can see that it's on set to Mitchell now.
Yeah, there's a pop-up menu down there by the subpixel button, and the subpixel it turns a subpixel filtering on or off, and then you have Mitchell, sync, triangle, quadratic, cubic, Catmull ROM. It defaults to Mitchell.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so there's quite a lot of options here, and as well as like everything that you're doing when you're doing those clone offsets, you know, you can be nudging in very micro elements here. You know, we're going to get into clone a little bit more in a bit. Getting back to my paint up here again, let's just kind of clean this up a little bit more. You know, I found a nice tool here is just this smudge tool, drag tool, sorry, where essentially I'm just kind of blending these areas together a little bit. Maybe even just like a little blur. And then, you know, what I found was like if I played with the grain, I think I ended up just doing a monotone grain on top of this.
And the grain, by the way, the grain and the grain brush and the blemish brush animate from frame to frame. So if you're going to manually paint from frame to frame with the grain, it will randomize properly. Or you can add it later in your in Flame directly, because you'll have the alpha from wherever Ross is painting.
I think in my version I took out the helmet holes just to pretend we're like had a different model helmet, but that's like the very basic idea. You know, obviously I could finesse this a lot more. If you wanted to then track this, remember I have the tracking of the helmet already done here. I can select this group of paint strokes. I can say I want to transform it and link it to the helmet. This is kind of similar to, if you guys know, way Moccha, you can link different groups to different track layers. So I want the helmet layer, and I'm going to tell it to match move. And then here you just have this auto paint function, which just runs this. And then we're going to be basically playing this stroke across time. And you're going to start seeing this keyframing across time. The nice thing about that is, I'm sure a lot of flame artists would probably paint maybe one frame of the helmet, Andy, and then track it to the, and then add some grain. But having the live cloning, especially for lighting shifts, is very, very nice.
Real flame artist Ross would tell the client that we shouldn't remove that logo. It's a branding opportunity. We should replace it with their logo.
But you get the idea of the workflow, very, very interactive. And if at some point I wanted to go back to any of these clone strokes, that I've done, it's very easy to do it. In fact, I didn't mention some of the other tools. I think I ended up using some dodge and burn, which I actually really like having this, sort of like try to give a little bit of roundness to my correction or something like that. There's a dodge filter. You can sort of see a little bit of adding a little bit of highlights. I have my opacity set down. I was kind of make this to make it a little bit more obvious, right? But these are, very nice interactive kind of color correction tools, dodging and burning and cloning and playing with the blemish, all integrated right here. And just don't forget, when you close and say yes, then I'm right back in my flame session. In fact, I could even, if I only wanted to use one frame as a clean plate to channel this into Flame's batch and smart vectors or whatever you want, you could just hit hold frame and it will basically just, you don't really even have to render at this point. That frame is done.
That's excellent.
Okay.
2 questions for you before we move on. The first is Silhouette always is the paint always recursive, or the cloning always recursive, or is it based on the original image? I guess is it updating every frame, or?
It's totally it's totally customizable, because you can paint from the original foreground, or what we're calling the input or foreground. You can paint from the output, which is what you just painted, or you can clone from previous frames, and those previous frames can be move in lockstep with whatever frame you're on, or you can say, I'm going to paint from frame 2 the entire time. So totally customizable. There's a source pop-up menu there in the clone controls, and you can change that to foreground or output. And then there's a frame control where you can pick whatever frame you want to paint from. So totally customizable there.
Cool. Tracking data. Can tracking data be imported from any other applications?
It can be imported from Nuke. It can be imported from After Effects corner pin. Moccha Pro it has a silhouette corner pin option. We import shape trackers still, I believe, if anybody's still using that. But yes, within the when you switch to the Roto module or node within Silhouette, you can select that.
And
there's the tracker import.
While we're doing that, I just wanted to kind of refresh here, and I've just loaded a brand new. Probably should have mentioned this, but when you load a Silhouette Paint OFX plugin in Flame, you are creating a project, and you are going to save that. So I could save this to the directory of my project. This is Ross's clone, whatever. This is where you're going to choose your bit depth. And this is also where, when I hit create project, this is where it's going to be saving those strokes, right? So that is important, kind of just a note. I wanted to show you what you guys were talking.
Right? That's where the cached frames are saved as well.
Yeah, it saves the frame.
You set for the file system.
Yeah, the frames and the strokes, and that's kind of the cool thing. When you're done painting, you go back to Flame. There's essentially no rendering. It's really just fetching what you already painted. Those bits.
Very cool.
Okay, let me just see what's happening. Marco, you probably might know. Oh, there we go. All right, so that's not a good clone, but I just want to show you that if I've done some clone here to remove this logo, right here, guys, is where I'm cloning from the foreground source. This is what Marco was just talking about. Here's the output. So now if I clone, this is that recursive kind of clone idea, right? I could clone this to over here, and then we're painting, obviously not the greatest example, but we are painting from the cloned source, the cloned output, and not the foreground output, right?
Gotcha.
What was the other thing that you guys were just talking about? Sorry.
Well, it was kind of like the frames, there's like the frame offset kind of went hand in hand with that. So
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You can do both.
Yeah, so right now it's set to relative, so it's just gonna, every time we advance through the clip, this happens to be a still, it would be relative, whereas suppose we can create a frame offset here. We could also load in, we can load multiple sources to clone out from. I think, Mark, you might even have an example of that.
That's perfect. We just had a question about that. Can an external clip be brought in? Alex here is asking about.
You can bring in up to 2 sources in Flame. Okay. There's more sources you can bring in the standalone, but there's input 1 and an input 2 in addition to the clip you're painting on.
Yeah. So let me think. Mark, is there any particular thing you think I should show next? I mean, I can show a little bit more tracking.
You know what? Why don't you? Let me bounce over to my screen, and I'll quickly show the other clip that I've got.
Cool. All right, I'm going to stop my share here, guys.
Okay, so there we go. So my screen here, this is kind of a wire removal, crane removal, and there's also a part card here. If I view input 1 here, where I've got the separate input, they went ahead and shot kind of a clean plate, but also they have the car moving. They didn't want to shoot the car moving underneath the actor in case he hit it. So basically, I've got the clean plate coming in my input 1, and you can see under the clone here, I now have an input 1. So this menu here is dynamic. So when you have multiple sources, they show up, but if you don't have them, it doesn't show the additional inputs. And really just kind of interactively, the way, I would use Silhouette in this case, I'd go to the clone. Since it's a locked off shot, I can clone with the 0 offset. And what am I looking at here? Flame. Let me just check here. Yeah, I don't want that. Interesting. Okay, I'm a dummy. Let me delete all my frames. So I'm going to clone from input 1, and I'm cloning with the 0 offset, and I'm going to kind of do this area above where the crane is for the sky. And since, you know, tracking information is not needed here, I just went ahead and selected those strokes and replicated them over all frames. And then I may go to the end of the sequence here and decide to add the car now. And you can do this in pieces, you know, changing your brush. Various, again, like Ross mentioned, various keystrokes, changing the size, use the bracket keys or the control key. And I can select here the strokes that I want. These strokes, there's a stroke tool that allows direct selection off the screen. And now I can decide to, I'm on the last frame, so I want to replicate those frames, and it adds the car in now. So I'm just kind of picking this shot apart in various pieces. You don't need to do it in any particular order. And right here, I've got an alpha for a shape that was already rotoed. And I used a point tracker here to track that shape. So that automatically will come in to Silhouette, and I'm using Obey. And that's probably worthwhile showing. If I have Obey on, it only paints in the area of the alpha. If I invert it, it paints everywhere but. So I'm using that alpha to quickly clone through to the clean plate to remove the wire on the various frames.
That's fantastic. I mean,
right? So
I can't say enough good about Marco. I can't say enough good about all the features that you have in that were on my "oh, wouldn't it be great if" list. You know, and that Obey and invert is certainly one of them.
I'm just getting rid of some dirt here, and I just wanted to show kind of the quickness of being able to. Looks like I painted his hand out by mistake there. Let me get that back. I don't know what I did that with that. Go back to the foreground. I'm going to paint back to the foreground. There we go. Now, if the color correction changed on this and you needed to rebuild all these strokes, you could rebuild it based on the newly color corrected image by hitting rebuild here in the auto paints right here. And it's going to go through and it's going to do it in the exact same order that I painted in. And then you're back to where you were. So it's just kind of a quick example of doing this without tracking.
That's great.
And I'm going to go ahead and stop my share here and bounce it back to you, Ross. I'll set up another shot when you're ready to bounce it back.
Sure. Andy has any questions?
Yeah, a couple here. Going back to the detail mode, or the paint detail mode, it looked like a high pass filter with a dialable high pass frequency. Is there a low pass version as well? It would be very useful for beauty work. And I see you have some clips coming up that could be beauty examples.
Yeah, that is definitely going to be a question for Marco.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we're using this gradient domain algorithm. So it doesn't do it in the same technique or manner that that you would do it in Photoshop. I can't tell you the exact algorithm that's used, but with the kind of the gradient domain algorithms that are used, there's a couple that most companies and developers use. Again, it breaks it down. You have a straight color frequency and then straight texture that are separated out. But we have the ability to change that frequency based on coarse, medium, and fine using that gradient domain algorithm.
Cool.
This is actually a shot that I think Ben had done, where there's the original shot. I'm not going to take you through all the pains of doing it, but there's basically some beauty work. And I know that flame artists are doing quite a lot of beauty work, but still, you could also use Silhouette for this kind of work as well, obviously. And I really like that sort of touch-up aspect of doing it in paint, and not as a compositor, but almost like a paint artist, where you are using all these different sort of gestural strokes. Here's first he did maybe this might help, but first he basically did a bunch of blemish strokes. So again, that's the combines the blur and the grain together in one pass. Let's see what else he did. And you can kind of, it's very cool. You can sort of look through and sort of see, sort of this was his process where he basically did, first he worked on the cheek there. He did tons of blemish and clone under her chin. He did a little bit of work there. Again, let's just flip back and forth between the before and after.
And Ross, if when you're ready, if you bounce it back to me, I can just show a couple strokes of a different image that I have for that color separation that might be interesting to see.
Sure, sure.
Okay. So when we were use the 8 and 9 key here to their keyboard shortcuts to show the detail. In this particular case, I'm going to use kind of the medium detail in this particular image. And what I'm going to do first, I'm going to use the burn tool here, and you know, I'm going to do it just on the color layer, because say I just want to kind of bring down this highlight, kind of get it close, but not spin it a little too much. Then using the drag tool, I can come in here with a larger brush and just kind of smooth that out a little bit. So if you kind of look at the before and after, kind of did the double duty of getting rid of some of those blemishes. Do a little bit more. But for fine detail, for some of these blemishes, the blur brush is useful. It's not going to, let me go to the normal color, right? And I'm just kind of blurring this. Now, it's not going to be perfect because there's still an issue with the detail here. If I pop over to the detail and look at that, I can probably smooth that out a bit better. I can do a little bit of dragging in the color as well to help that. Or cloning is also really useful to clone just in the detail here, finding different areas. No wonder it's looking weird. I was painting on the red channel. And go to color and drag this a little bit. So I'm using a combination of dragging here to get some of this darkness, get the skin tone a little bit better to kind of even that out. So if I kind of compare, I'm using the 1 and 2 keys to jump between the foreground and the output. And down here as well, just blurring on the color only layer to start with. Got my opacity turned down pretty low. Does a lot of the work, and then I can then selectively clone only in the detail to get rid of the rest of it. Generally trying to do this with just the clone brush alone is kind of tough because it just does everything too much. But it's just great here to look at this area here. It's a little too dark. A little bit of drag brush is just dragging that color and retaining that texture, and retaining the texture, changing the color, and then later when you want to, with separate tracking of the forehead, I can select those strokes and apply different tracking to the forehead, to the chin. I can use a holdout for the seat, so because the seat moves across. But if we look here, here's the original. Let me just jump here, get rid of those strokes. We don't see them. Let me hide those. All right, and play through here and switch. So here's the kind of the painted on one frame and then just applied to the various frames with tracking, different tracking from forehead, chin, and using the seat as well. So it does.
I can't tell you how great it is,
really good
and
job.
to have the frequency separation tools built right in and not have to build separate pipelines going into your paint node, and also to have the ability to bring in separate tracks and apply the separate tracks to individual groups of strokes. It's really just a well thought out workflow for this kind of stuff.
And also with the Silhouette standalone, you can replicate that workflow with nodes. There's a detail node that you can paint directly on the color or the detail. Gives you a little bit more flexibility in adding grain later.
That's awesome. I had a couple more questions here in the Q&A, and then I think we probably have time for one or two more examples if you guys got them. The first is, in Flame, can this be used as a gap effect in the timeline? I would imagine it can, right? As long as, well, let me, I let you answer that question.
I don't know if I'm suitable to answer that question. A gap effect in like using it without any media, is that the question? I'm not really sure.
Right. Would it use the media that's below it, or does it rely on the media of the media of the segment that your OFX is applied to, or will it respect the media below it?
You know, I don't think it would. I mean, I think we rely on an actual input. You know, of course, in batch, if you hooked in just like a black clip, you could paint on it, but I believe we're going to need something physical. In other words, we don't automatically hook anything up. With After Effects and a layer-based system, you know, we have layer selectors, but with Flame, I think we still kind of treat it more of like a node-based system as in batch. So I think we're going to require it.
You could paint on, you know, with like your, you know, with any media channeled in, and then just remove the source and, you know, give it a different dummy clip. Yeah.
Gotcha. What about, let's say the unthinkable happens and a client changes a cut on you, and all of a sudden, you know, you now have 10 or 12 or 20 new frames at the start of your clip. Is it as simple as going into like the animation curves, or can you take the paint history and slide it 20 frames down and then paint backwards?
Yeah, that's going to be kind of tricky. With Roto, that's not an issue because you can slide those keyframes, but those frames are numbered on disk according to the timeline. So the short answer is no. You probably would want to. You could render out those frames with you know, with the alpha, and then just comp it and slide it over. I mean, that's what you'd have to do in this case.
Yeah, or pad your shot at the beginning with some dummy frames at the head and tail, if you know if you're foreseeing. But these things don't happen in post, do they, Andy?
No, not yet today. I can tell you that. All right, cool.
There's not that much time left, so I thought maybe one thing, you know, I actually thought to mention was just another thing that Flame Artist asked us for many years, which is just the GMass tracer in Moccha. So I just want to give you a very, very simple example of that. Maybe jump out of here. And
looks like there's a question about whether or not the media is being referenced directly. It's not. It's being referenced through the host. So if you open this project, you know, through another host like Nuke, it's going to use whatever media is plugged into it. So you just need to plug in the same sequence and start times.
Gotcha. One other question that came up was a follow-up to, can tracking data be imported from other applications? What about exporting the tracking data out of?
Yeah, that's pretty much the same. We can export to Nuke, to Flame. We export our tracked layer as a 4-point corner pin as far as Flame goes. But yeah, Flame, Nuke, Shake. We do it to a generic text file as well. So if you have your own converter, we spit it out as just plain text as well. If you want to do any kind of modifications to it, custom.
Excellent.
I'll just share my screen, guys, really quick. Let me know if you can see. Just want to mention one last thing here about sort of what we're doing with Flame. Can you share this? Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Yep.
Of course, that now my system is going into something funny.
It's inevitable.
Yeah, yeah.
There we go.
So here I'm in batch. And I want to mention that Moccha Pro is an OFX plugin as well. And I know many flame artists over years had Moccha Pro running on as a standalone application to support them, or maybe as on the assistant station to do their roto and their tracking. And we would get masks out as G masks, and so everything would be baked, right? So that was always a fun issue. Here in the Moccha UI. If you haven't seen this, I'm in essentials mode, but this is the standard mode here. But this is kind of a crazy rotomation project that I did recently, but you can see there's tons and tons of layers here. And, some of these layers have very few keyframes because they've been tracked, so like that nose layer is linked to a face track, that kind of thing. So when we have added in the most recent version of Moccha Pro, which is 2020.5. Just want to mention that we did ask the GMask tracer, which will basically allow you to get your masks out with an axis and with the one-to-one relationship with tracking and roto are separated now, which I know people are pretty excited about, especially obviously the flame artists who are using Moccha. It's really a great workflow there. So, I can bring in this into Flame, and you can sort of see all my shapes came across from Moccha. And, if I look at my GMask schematic here, all these different shapes came across with proper keyframes. So, this face down here, you can see has a lot less keyframes. It's not baked, right? So now I can, before you would always have to go back to Moccha to make any changes. And now, you can still make all your roto changes. All these different GMasks will be linked to the tracks that you've done. So I just wanted to kind of mention that. And that is a free update for the customers who have Moccha Pro 2020.
That's excellent. I know it was a long time coming, so thank you very much. I'm sure it was a ton of work.
Yeah, no, we're happy to do it. We were able to kind of find like a cycle in the development, a small period that we could sort of cram this feature in, and talk to a lot of great people on our beta group who have been longtime Flame and Moccha users, and they gave us a lot of great feedback and tips on how they wanted to see it work.
Just one question about the GMask tracer export there. I think I saw it in the pop-up menu for export options. The question was, where are the axis nodes? And that was right in the pop-up there. You had two different options, with and without the axis nodes, right?
Yes. Yeah. So if I bring up, generally though, just I do want to, Moccha is a planar tracker. So, I mean, you're going to get a 3D axis, but these aren't, they're not going to be like normalized in your scene, if that makes a sense. Like, depending on the camera movement, you could, link 3D effects to these axes, but they're really meant to be like sort of normalized per plane to each shape, if that makes sense. Sorry, that was tracking. It would be under the shape data here. Here, right here. Just your mask or shape and axis.
Cool.
And of course, the G mask is the older version, which would be everything's baked. Okay. Excellent.
And so Silhouette Paint is available as OFX, right? For Flame and for all the other hosts. And what is the cost for that, for a license?
Yeah, so Silhouette FX, it's a subscription-only product. It's $395 per year for Flame, $195 for the Adobe version.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And we have a license to give away today, right, my friends?
Yeah, Andy, I'm gonna check out. I think you asked me to.
If we were meeting live, I would ask everyone to please take the other half of the raffle ticket that they got at the beginning out of their pockets, and everybody would be awkwardly juggling like their beer and their raffle ticket. But yeah, Ross, if you'd like to pick somebody off the list, a lucky winner, I'll add a drum roll to the video before I post it today.
Give me 1 second. My system is kind of. I'm trying to get back to my browser.
No problem. We all have 37 windows open right now between
Yeah,
Zoom and the
exactly.
various apps we're trying to show. Oh, thank you, Charles, for for letting us know what your ticket number is. Always prepared.
Okay, I'm going to pick a random person here, and that person is Bob Maple.
Bob
Congratulations,
Maple, ladies and
Bob
gentlemen.
Maple.
Excellent. Congratulations, Bob. Woo! That's wonderful. And thank you very much, Marco, and thank you, Ross, for taking the time out today to show us Silhouette paint. It's a fantastic job. And if anybody has any questions for you guys, I'm sure you can be reached on Facebook, or how would you like to be reached?
Yeah, we actually have a Silhouette forum on Boris Feck's website. That's probably the best way to reach us, or just on the contact forum, or sure, I'm also on Facebook all the time. So, but yeah, definitely borisfex.com. There's a forum. And I also just want to mention that we have a lot of great videos for training. I know we covered a lot very quickly, and there's a lot more we didn't have time to show. There's a 5-hour training course that is free for Silhouette paint, and that's just under the borisfex.com training section.
Excellent. Does anybody have any other questions?
We had one question there about whether or not Silhouette was built for Flame on Linux, and the answer was yes.
Oh, there you go.
It is. Yeah, so there's Windows, Mac, Linux versions for the OFX plugin, and so Flame, Resolve, Nuke, Vegas. So your license for OFX works across all those OFX hosts.
And
the training videos. Let's see, where do I get the training videos? So those are on the Boris Effects website. If you go to the Silhouette section, there's a link to training, I believe. There's some free videos if you look in the video section, and there's also some paid training, which is also accessible on that page, isn't it, Ross? We can get
Yeah, the paid training is for the full Silhouette application, whereas the Silhouette Paint has about 5 hours of free training, but it's all found right after the main training pull-down menu on the Boris Feck site.
Cool. 2 more questions that came in. One, can you customize the hotkeys?
You can via there's a file that shows basically a text file, Python file, but it's text-based, that shows what the current keyboard shortcuts are assigned to. So if you don't like the way they're set, you can just change them.
Excellent. And then as far as the subscription, it's only available annually at this point, or is it also available monthly or quarterly?
We actually, as a company, that's actually probably good for a lot of people to hear. We're always we're not crazy about the idea of going to monthly, but recently, especially in context to more people working remotely with everything that's happened in this last couple months with the COVID and everything, we did decide to create a monthly subscription program, and that's for all products. So if you if you do have an old Sapphire project that you wanted to get Sapphire for a month, certainly. But same, yeah, we do have annual or monthly for all the products.
Excellent. All right. Well, I want to thank you again very much for taking the time to join us today. Let me close this out with a little bit more of my slideshow. Let me just to show everybody what's coming up on Logic Live next weekend. We have Resolve for Flame Artists with David Johns from LA. Definitely looking forward to that one. Followed by Advanced Techniques with Mihran Stepanyan on the 21st. And the man, the myth, the legend, Joel Osis on June 28th. And Joel's session is going to start a trend for us for the next month, which is kind of profiling flame artists and showing off what it is that they do. On July 12th, I got Brian Higgins from Chicago. That should say July 19th, Andy Davis from LA. And July 26th, Naveen Srivastava from Toronto. So definitely looking forward to that. It's going to be a fantastic summer here at Logic Live. Be sure to go over to Logic TV. We'll be able to find all the previous episodes. This episode will be up as soon as I can possibly get it up there. Please be sure to go to Logic Live's YouTube page and subscribe. We're trying to get those numbers up as high as we can. And One final thank you to Synesys Oceania for sponsoring Logic Live solutions, integration, and support for digital content creators. Find out more about them at synesys.io. That's going to do it for Logic Live today, everybody. I want to say thank you very much, and we will see you next week.